and welcome to Roundtable. We're having a conversation with Professor Srinath Reddy. He's President, Public Health Foundation India, and also is part of the ICMR task force on managing COVID. Well, Professor Reddy, I was, as we were discussing earlier, I was hoping we won't have to have a conversation again so soon, but it looks like it's taken a full circle. We are back where we were exactly the same place as we were last year.
Well, worse than that, it appears in terms of the rate of rise. But that's understandable because last year we were seeing the lockdown in action and also release from the lockdown in stages. People were still a little scared, and people, at least some of the people, were observing precautions. We were trying to prevent very large mass gatherings. So compared to last year, certainly things have been different because now we are a fully open society. We have been very mobile till recently. We've been having large celebrations, gatherings, whether they were political, religious, or social. So in a sense, it was an unrestrained society, which gave an open invitation to the virus to resurface and spread fast, and also allowed the new viral mutants or the variants to come in and found a welcoming group.
What are we seeing right now is the UK mutant, people are saying, and compare it to the other, is it more deadly? Does it spread faster?
Well, as far as the UK variant is concerned, it appears to have definitely come in, and that is the more frequently represented variant that's been isolated in all the genomic studies that have been done, and seems to be particularly severe in Punjab, and they're associating it with the NRI connection with UK. But otherwise, too, the UK variant has now spread around the world. So it could have come from other places too later on. But the UK variant has been the most identified variant so far. But the other variants have surfaced, including some homegrown ones as well, which are now beginning to make their presence. And in Maharashtra, the so-called double mutant, which has some characteristics of an Indian version with some acquired characteristics in addition of the California mutation, all conjoined into one mutant. So these are now beginning to spread as well. So we are seeing different variants coming into play. But that doesn't mean that the original wild virus has gone off. It's still there. So we are seeing a combination of viruses which are on the prowl.
But what about the vaccinations? Where are we on that? Why are our vaccinations are they not helping? People who have been, who've got a dose, even 2 doses, are still getting COVID. What is really worrying me is the health force is getting it. Doctors at Gangaram Hospital, various hospitals who must have got both the doses, and they are getting it. So that's also very worrying.
Well, there is a failure of understanding among the people who have felt that these vaccines are inevitably going to prevent all infections. Right from the beginning, we know that that's not the case. These are systemically administered vaccines which produce a very strong defense against severe infection and death once the virus has entered. It may not be able to prevent a mild infection. So that is the challenge. Of course, over a period of time when large number of people get vaccinated, it is true that the amount of mild infections also will not actually discharge too many viruses into the environment, and you will start seeing the cases come down markedly. But mild infections, even in vaccinated people, are not unexpected. They can happen. If we can succeed with these vaccines in preventing severe infection and death, that's a success. And that is the success that was measured in the clinical trials. On the other hand, if we do find that the mucosal vaccines, which may come in, if they are really successful, then they may add the additional element of preventing the infection per se, but that is something that awaits not only further development, but also clear-cut proof in clinical trials.
Okay, before you mean with the nasal vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson and others?
Yes, the inhalable vaccines, yeah.
Where are we on that? Because I'm hearing that Johnson & Johnson is, saying that by when can we see these vaccines coming in? What is the next vaccine to expect for Indians?
Well, they still have to go into trials. I mean, they're still in the relatively early stages of trials. So by the time these will come through, it'll take time. But even the ones that have been tested, standard systemic intramuscular vaccines, which have been tested outside, if they have to go through some trial process in India to satisfy our regulatory requirements of bridging trials, that will also take a few months. If, on the other hand, if our government decides, the regulatory authorities decide that the bridging trials are no longer required, credible international regulatory agencies, if they've given their permission, and if that is considered adequate, then we may be able to cut short that time. But even then, the production lines will have to be set up, and that will take a little time.
Little time means end of the year, earlier?
No, I think it will be earlier. I would expect somewhere by August, September, if things are sorted out.
There's we've heard a lot of, apprehensions about the vaccine, especially Covishield, which is not the ICMR is Covaxin, but the AstraZeneca one, there's fears of blood clotting. There's been a lot of apprehension that younger people should not take Covishield, interestingly. What do you make of that?
So let me first explain what the observed results are and observed findings are, and then talk a little bit about why these clots may happen. Because these are very special type of clots in very special situations, which are extraordinarily unusual. So they're not easy to predict. Well, firstly, if you look at what's happened, as far as AstraZeneca was concerned, initially there was some concern about the clots, but people in Europe felt that it is the elderly who may be a little more susceptible because they were not included in the original trial. And first they said elderly people should not get the vaccine. But then they started giving it to younger people, and then they noticed the side effects happening, adverse effects, somewhat serious. And these were shown to be by way of venous blood clotting, not arterial blood clotting, but venous blood clotting. Again, in relatively unusual locations, in the brain, in the venous sinus of the brain and of the gut, the so-called splanchnic circulation. So that is where they found that these things were happening. And they started finding it more among younger women, because they were giving it anyway to young people. But women dominated that number, and below 50 in particular. So then they said, okay, if that is so, then we should try and gather more information. Initially, this was noted in Austria and Germany. And then when they started gathering this information and started talking about it, the people said, no, these are possibly not associated with the vaccine. But then the numbers started getting built up. And initially, even WHO said, we don't think there is an association. And then it said, in any case, we think the benefits far outweigh the problems. And Britain also said the same thing. But then they started looking at their cases, and they found that even in Britain, the numbers were rising. And then when they did the count, they said, yes, there is an association. We can't explain exactly what the mechanism is, but then Britain went and said anybody under 30 should not be given. And European nations said anybody under 60 should not be given. And some people said that below 50 should not be given. So essentially, AstraZeneca's vaccine internationally has run into problems. These are relatively rare, 1 in 100,000, which is not a big number. But what marks it out is a very unusual type of clotting, because this is a clotting in the big venous sinus of the brain, as well as in the veins of the intestines, what's called the splanchnic circulation. Now, these are not usual places of venous thrombosis. You hear of venous thrombosis in the legs of people who take long flights or who have been lying in bed for a long time, what's called deep vein thrombosis. But these are unusual locations. And the second and more unusual factor is that this clotting is associated with a marked fall in platelets, which are blood cells which are usually associated with increased clotting tendency. So if the platelets come down in number, usually you expect a bleeding disorder. That's why in dengue, you see when blood platelets fall, people are worried about bleeding, and they give platelet transfusions. But here, it's a very unusual combination. You're getting low blood platelets, but you're not getting bleeding, but you're getting clotting, and getting clotting in unusual sites. But there is an explanation for this. The explanation is that arterial clotting, which is the high pressure circulation of the body, the arteries, there the platelets, which are the cells in the blood, which cause the plugs for clotting, the platelet thrombi they are called, they are in the high pressure circulation. In the low pressure circulation of the veins, which are much more low pressure, there you depend much more on what are called the clotting factors, which are produced by the liver. And now it is likely that because of an immunological reaction, the platelets are falling down markedly, and the body is trying to protect itself from bleeding disorders by producing clotting factors. And clotting factors rising in large amounts may actually cause the clotting in the brain as well as in the gut. And that is what seems to be happening here. But it's an unusual combination of a low platelet count, clotting in unusual locations, and an immunological reaction which is possibly responsible for this. But as I said, it's 1 in 100,000.
But how serious is it in terms of fatality?
Well, there have been fatalities, and that's where I think the regulators have taken action, because it's not easy to recognize. First of all, clinically, it's a very unusual combination, and people may not get immediate warning symptoms. They may get severe headaches or other problems, but by the time they reach for medical attention, it may be a little problematic. So that's why people are concerned. They're trying to find out what the underlying mechanism is. They think it's immunological, but we still do not know how to treat it, definitely. So we are looking, there are various possibilities which can be tried out, but we do not have any proven treatment as yet.
I have a slightly awkward question. You know, the doctors that since we are seeing our healthcare workers who are getting this COVID again, most of them took Covishield and not Covaxin, because initially that is what was available. So is there a difference in the efficacy of the two, or is there that, that one should take Covaxin over Covishield?
Well, I cannot really say that because it's not a head-to-head comparison, but also remember that far fewer people have been given Covaxin in this country than Covishield. So we still have to wait and see. It is also likely that the doctors who received Covishield might have felt highly protected. They is likely to get infected if they expose themselves a lot. But all we can assure them is that the infection is unlikely to be severe and not likely to cause them severe enough infection for hospitalization or death. But minor infections, mild infections are possible.
And regarding Covaxin, is it recognized outside India? Because, I saw an advisory, say, from Thailand doing the rounds on social media saying that, they've listed the vaccines that were acceptable for tourists coming in. Covishield was mentioned, not Covaxin. But I'm told while people are going to the US, they can go with Covaxin also. So is there some kind of a problem in that sense of acceptability?
Well, ideally, because this is only a trial that was, in a sense, analyzed when it was still in progress, and permission was given on the basis of emergency use authorization, and then the interim results came out later on. But even the interim results, while very promising, do not amount to a fully completed trial. So once the trial is fully completed, then, for example, WHO would be able to take notice of that particular evidence and may certify it as well, in which case more countries will accept it. But it entirely depends upon the national regulator of any country to decide which vaccine they feel they should give approval to or not. Like, for example, we have not yet given approval to Pfizer. So it's entirely the national regulatory authority's prerogative. But I believe Covaxin, when it completes its full trial and those results are published or at least submitted to our regulator, and possibly even WHO has access to that, more countries will be able to accept Covaxin.
Talking to him about vaccinations, and will there be a shortage of vaccinations, Professor Reddy?
Well, we are seeing a bit of controversy in the media. It does appear from multiple reports, and even what some of the state governments are saying, that they're running short of vaccines. Even some of the private hospitals are saying that they're running short of vaccines. Though the government says that there are adequate stocks available. So if that is so, there is some problem to be sorted out in ensuring that the stocks get readily into the supply chain and reach the vaccination points. So what are the logistical issues there? We'll have to wait and see. But even if the currently available stocks are adequate and they can actually replenish the various hospitals and other vaccination points, the question is, how are we going to be dealing with it over the next few months? Will Covishield be able to really raise the production? Because Serum Institute of India has been saying that they're facing some constraints in raising the amount and meeting both the international demand and the Indian demand. They're asking the Indian government for more funding. Covaxin has certain limitations in the amount they can produce. They can produce a certain amount, but beyond that, they will not be able to do it. Therefore, we probably require more new vaccines to come in, and also probably other companies also to take up some of the existing vaccines, approved vaccines for production. So how the government is going to plan for that, we'll have to wait and see. But next 2 or 3 months are going to be crucial. After 3 months, if we're going to get plenty of more vaccines getting the regulatory approval, then our situation may improve quite a lot. But in the next 2 or 3 months, when we still have only 2 vaccines really, we'll have to work with that. Because even if the vaccines that have been approved elsewhere, the J&J and the Novavax, are given regulatory approval without the need for a bridging trial, even then, by the time the production machinery gears up, it'll take a couple of months.
So, do you have a solution on what to do? For instance, why have we not given approval to Pfizer? That, because let private hospitals bring it in, those who can pay for it will pay for it, and let them at least get vaccinated.
Well, I think Pfizer went through different issues. First of all, when they said minus 70 degrees, it appeared to be totally beyond our cold chain. Then they later on came and said, okay, we can bring it, minus 18 is fine with us. So now they're making further improvements. But secondly, they twice applied or thrice applied and then withdrew the application for whatever reasons we do not know. And also there's been competition for the Pfizer vaccine in the United States as well as in Europe. So even there, the cornering of the vaccine stocks by the high-income countries would not have left us with much of vaccine unless Pfizer started manufacturing it on a large scale in India. So I think there has been a certain amount of reluctance on part of Indian authorities to believe that Pfizer is a solution to our problems. But also the confidence at that time, I think, was that India has sort of ended the epidemic and we probably did not need so many vaccines in such large volume, something which we will have to reassess right now.
And how much is this second wave, or whatever you want to call it, because of our carelessness? And how much is it because, I don't know, is it something that occurs every summer? I read a report saying this thing is going to carry on for the next 5 years. This pattern of rising infection in March, April, and then easing off in the winters.
We have seen that, and it may happen. We do not know if the virus actually stays with us. We may get cycles of the epidemic. I don't think it will become as mild as flu. We get seasonal flu. It may not become as mild, but if we vaccinate adequate number of people, particularly those who are vulnerable, then even if the virus starts resurfacing seasonally every year, at least we will not have such a large number of serious infections crowding the hospital or such large number of deaths. And it's possible that the virus itself may become milder over time. So just like other viruses have in the past. So it's a question of our protecting ourselves. And let us remember the best way of protection is to make sure that we do not have crowds and we wear masks till at least the vulnerable people are protected. At least I would say till everybody above the age of 35 is given the vaccine shot, and everybody under the age of 35 who has any recognized comorbidity, because there are younger people also with diabetes, younger people also with hypertension, younger people with lung disease, they all should be given the vaccine shots as well. So if we can do that, then at least we can then say, okay, even if the virus resurfaces seasonally, the damage to us may not be that high. But the important thing is to show the endurance till then and show the commitment till then. We can't have this kind of seesaw phenomenon in which we start saying that, okay, the spike is going up, we'll put on some masks and go for lockdowns. And then after 2 months say, oh, we have got herd immunity, and then start celebrating because the counts have come down, and then the counts will go up again on the other side.
Yeah, what about this famous herd immunity? Can you explain the logic of that? Did we have it? Have we lost it? Or we never had it?
I don't think we ever had it, frankly. Because you see, it is true that we have had up to 30% possibly of people exposed in terms of antibody levels. We do not know how many of those antibodies were neutralizing antibodies, which could hold the virus in check. And we do not know how long those antibodies last, because it was only a single exposure to the virus, unlike the vaccine, where you get a stronger dose of exposure to the antigen and you get a booster dose as well. Therefore, the vaccine-induced immunity is going to be longer than the natural infection. The natural infection, we do not know how long the immunity would have lasted. Secondly, we do not know how effective those antibodies would be against the variants. So that is also an unknown factor. But even without the variants, in a large country, if you have some places with about 50% of exposure and other places with 20% exposure, the virus can keep recycling again and again. And we know that for a fact now that in Brazil, where 76% of the people in Manaus had positive antibodies, still the epidemic has been raging because people have been entering that community and bringing in the virus and so on. So herd immunity will happen possibly through both acquired infection and through vaccine-induced immunity, but it will take a couple of years before all of India becomes endowed with that level of immunity. To keep jumping the gun and saying that we have acquired herd immunity and open the doors and let's celebrate is to give an invitation to the virus as well as its variants to come in large hordes. Of course, they will come in.
That is true. And what about a lot of people have, any advice for those who've tested, found out later on that they actually had COVID without knowing it, without showing any of the symptoms? Should they expect some of the COVID after effects like the brain fog, fatigue, or would that be part of the thing? Will they have the after effect symptoms?
Well, people are being followed. We do not know. The likelihood of having after effects if the people were totally asymptomatic in the first instance is very unlikely. On the other hand, you may actually uncover some problems by imaging, like people have imaged people who are supposedly asymptomatic, young people, athletes as well, including competitive athletes. They were all subjected to different scans, lung scans, as well as heart imaging, and some damage was found. But how long that damage will last and whether there will be other after effects afterwards, we do not know. Studies on this so-called long COVID or post-COVID effects are still going on globally. All that we know is that of the people who are diagnosed to have COVID, about a third of them do seem to have some after effects. Some last for weeks, some last for months. But we still do not know exactly how long they will last and what the treatment is going to be. But I think this is something that we need to watch out for.
But you're definitely not in favor of another lockdown.
I do not think so, because they could be, as they are calling it, micro-containment measures in areas restricted, and even the so-called night curfews are fine. But unless we develop the will, both political and public will, in order to have a sustained effort at avoiding crowding and wearing masks for some months to come, this lockdown is not going to really serve a purpose. It's like, taking a person into intensive care and he comes out after the treatment and starts smoking again. That's not wise. So a person with blood pressure and diabetes requires long-term care so that they don't get repeatedly into the intensive care unit. So that is the kind of approach we need to have as a society. Yes, if there is a problem that really exacerbates, get into the hospital for a short time, but don't make that a habit.
Fair enough. Thank you. And I think the problem also lies in some of our, where elections are okay, Kumbh Mela is okay, but a private car is not okay. You have to wear a mask if you're traveling alone in a car. There's all these contradictions that are coming in, which makes us very difficult as a common person to also follow these rules. But thank you so much for this talk and for enlightening us. As always, thank you, Professor Reddy, for this conversation.
Well, the logic of politics and administration is so abstruse that we cannot always interpret it. And if the media finds it difficult to interpret, how can we poor public health persons interpret it?
Politicians defy science also. Well, I agree with you on that one. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.